The salt wind whipped Maria's face as she scrambled down the jagged cliffs of Devil's Point, her swollen belly making every step treacherous. 6 months pregnant and 3 days from eviction, she was hunting for anything, driftwood, scrap metal, bottles, that could buy her baby one more day of shelter. Then she saw it. A twisted wing jutting from behind a boulder, metal scarred by decades of ocean spray. The plane had been there so long that barnacles claimed the fuselage like armor. But when Maria squeezed through the cracked cockpit window, her flashlight beam revealed something impossible. Leather satchels, perfectly preserved, stuffed with more cash than she'd seen in her lifetime. What she didn't know was that Maria Santos wasn't just a struggling waitress. She was the daughter of Detective Ray Santos, the cop who died investigating this very crash 23 years ago, the same crash that powerful people had buried with bullets and bribes. Now, as sirens wailed in the distance, Maria clutched the money that could save her child's future. But had she just signed both their death warrants? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's hands trembled as she opened the first satchel. Bundles of $100 bills, wrapped in plastic, filled every inch. Her breath caught in her throat. There had to be hundreds of thousands of dollars here, maybe more. Enough to save her apartment, pay for the baby's medical bills, maybe even finish nursing school like she'd always dreamed. The sirens grew louder, though they seemed to be heading away from the coast. Still, panic shot through her chest. She stuffed 3 bundles into her jacket pockets, then hesitated. The weight of the cash felt wrong somehow, like holding stolen goods. But stolen from whom? The pilot was clearly dead. She could see skeletal remains still strapped into the cockpit seat, a grim sight that made her stomach lurch. Maria forced herself to look away and focus on the satchels. 5 bags total, each one heavy with cash. She couldn't carry them all, not in her condition and not up those treacherous cliffs. But she could take enough to solve her immediate problems, just enough to survive. As she reached for the second bag, her flashlight beam caught something else, a manila folder wedged beneath the pilot's seat. The plastic wrapping had protected it from moisture, just like the money. With careful fingers, she pulled it free and opened it. The first page made her blood run cold. Her father's name was scrawled across the top in red ink. Detective Ray Santos, eliminate. Below that, a list of dates and locations. Drug shipments, she realized. This was a smuggling operation, and somehow her father had been investigating it. Her father, who'd died in a car accident when she was 3 years old. The father she barely remembered, whose police pension had been her mother's only income until cancer took her too. Maria's vision blurred as she read further. Names she didn't recognize, but one that made her heart skip. Mayor Hoffman. The same Mayor Hoffman who still ran Bayport after all these years. The man who cut ribbons at charity events and promised to clean up the streets. The folder contained photographs too. Grainy surveillance shots of men in expensive suits meeting at the docks, money changing hands, and in one photo, a younger version of Mayor Hoffman shaking hands with a man whose face was circled in red ink. Written beside it in her father's familiar handwriting, confirmed, H is dirty. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Maria knew she had to move, but her mind reeled. Her father hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered for getting too close to the truth. This plane, this money, it was all connected to a conspiracy that had cost him his life. She stuffed the folder inside her jacket alongside the cash. Whatever this was, she couldn't ignore it. Not when it explained why her father never came home that night. Not when it might be the key to finally getting justice for him. The climb back up the cliff face was brutal. Rain made the rocks slippery, and her pregnancy made her clumsy. Twice she nearly lost her footing, the image of her baby growing up an orphan driving her to keep climbing. The money felt heavier with each step, weighted down by its dark history. Now she knew he was a hero who'd died for getting too close to the truth. Maria started the engine and drove toward town, toward her cramped apartment and stack of unpaid bills. But everything had changed. She had money now, enough to survive. She also had evidence of a decades-old conspiracy that reached the highest levels of local government. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The wind had died to a whisper by the time Maria made it back to the cottage, her hands still trembling from what she'd discovered in the wreckage. She pressed her back against the front door, breathing hard, one hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly where the baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her mother's agitation. Through the thin walls, she could hear David on another phone call with the insurance company, his voice strained and desperate. The same conversation they'd been having for weeks, ever since the diagnosis. Experimental treatment, not covered. $47,000 they didn't have. Maria slipped past the living room and into their bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. The duffel bag sat on their bed like an accusation, its black canvas sides bulging with more money than she'd ever seen in her life. Her fingers traced the worn zipper, and she felt that same electric thrill mixed with dread that had coursed through her in the cave. She opened the bag again, just to make sure she hadn't imagined it. Stacks of bills, mostly hundreds, bound with rubber bands that had grown brittle with age. Some of the money showed water damage around the edges, but most of it appeared surprisingly well preserved. The bag must have been sealed tight when the plane went down. A piece of paper had been tucked between two of the stacks, and Maria carefully extracted it. The letterhead read First National Bank of Miami and was dated September 15, 1987. The document appeared to be some kind of transfer record, but the handwriting was faded and difficult to read. She could make out a few words: Cayman Islands, bearer bonds, and what looked like an account number. Maria's stomach clenched. This wasn't just cash someone had been traveling with. This was something else entirely. The bedroom door opened, and David appeared, his cell phone finally silent in his hand. His eyes immediately found the bag, and his face went pale. "Jesus, Maria, what did you do?" "I found it," she said quickly. "In the cliffs. There's an old plane wreck hidden in a cave, and this was inside." David stared at the money, then at his wife. "We can't keep this." "Why not? It's been sitting there for decades. Nobody's looking for it anymore." "You don't know that." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This could belong to anyone. Drug dealers, the mob, or it could belong to some businessman who died in a crash 30 years ago." Maria zipped the bag shut. "His family probably collected life insurance already. This money isn't helping anyone just sitting in that cave." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she recognized from their most stressful moments. "How much is in there?" "I don't know exactly. A lot. Maybe enough for the treatment, maybe more." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of possibility hanging between them. Through the bedroom window, Maria could see storm clouds gathering over the ocean again. Another front moving in. "We should call the police," David said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "And tell them what? That we found a bag of money and we'd like to turn it in so they can put it in evidence storage forever?" Maria sat heavily on the bed, feeling the baby shift inside her. "David, our daughter is going to die if we don't do something. The doctors were very clear about that." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. They'd avoided saying it so bluntly before, dancing around the reality with euphemisms and false hope. But here it was, stark and undeniable. David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his jaw tightened. "The hospital. They want to know when we can make the first payment." Maria watched her husband's face, seeing the exact moment when his moral certainty began to crack. They'd been good people their whole lives. They followed rules, paid taxes, returned lost wallets to their owners. But good people didn't always get rewarded for being good. "We could take what we need," David said quietly, "for the treatment, and then figure out what to do with the rest." It wasn't the moral victory Maria had been hoping for, but it was a start. She reached for his hand, pulling him down to sit beside her on the bed. "We'll be careful," she said. "We'll research the crash, find out what happened. If there are family members who have a legitimate claim, we'll make sure they get what's theirs." David nodded slowly, but Maria could see the doubt still lingering in his eyes. Outside, the first drops of rain began pattering against the window, and somewhere in the distance, she thought, she heard the sound of a car engine on the coastal road. It was probably nothing, just another tourist braving the weather to see the lighthouse. But as the engine sound faded, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had just changed in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The duffel bag felt heavier on the walk back to her cabin, though Maria knew that was impossible. She'd counted the bills 3 times before zipping it closed. More money than she'd ever seen in her life, more than enough for the surgery, for everything the baby would need. Her hands trembled as she thought about Dr. Morrison's grave expression when he'd explained the procedure, the specialist in Seattle, the narrow window they had to act. She paused at her front door, scanning the empty dirt road that wound through the coastal pines. No other tire tracks, no sign that anyone had been here. The isolation that usually comforted her now felt precarious, like being balanced on a knife's edge. Inside, Maria set the bag on her kitchen table and stared at it. The faded green canvas looked innocent enough, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd crossed some invisible line by taking it. The plane had been there for decades. She was certain of that from the way the metal had corroded and the forest had grown around it. Whoever owned this money was long dead. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jake. How'd the appointment go? Maria's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Jake worked 2 jobs already, pulling double shifts at the lumber mill and weekend construction work. She'd seen the calculations he thought he'd hidden, the desperate arithmetic of their situation scrawled on the back of utility bills. They were 3 months behind on everything, and the baby was due in 4 months. Same as before, she typed back. Talk tonight. She walked to the bathroom mirror and lifted her shirt, studying the curve of her belly. At 6 months, the baby's movements had become more pronounced, little kicks and rolls that made her smile despite everything else. Dr. Morrison had been clear. Without the surgery to correct the heart defect, their daughter had maybe a 20% chance of survival. 20%. The number haunted her dreams. Maria returned to the kitchen and unzipped the bag again. The bills were mostly hundreds, some 50s, all old but in remarkably good condition. She'd grabbed 3 thick stacks from what had to be dozens more scattered throughout the plane's cabin. Even this small portion was more than enough. A car engine rumbled up the road, and Maria's heart lurched. She quickly zipped the bag closed and shoved it into the pantry behind a case of canned soup. The engine grew louder, then stopped. A door slammed. Through the kitchen window, she saw Jake's beat-up Ford pickup. Relief flooded through her as she watched him climb the front steps, his work clothes dusty and his face exhausted. He was home 3 hours early. "Hey," he said, kissing her forehead as he came inside. "Mill shut down early, machinery problems." He paused, studying her face. "You okay? You look pale." "Just tired." Maria forced a smile. "How was your day?" Jake washed his hands at the sink, and she watched his reflection in the window. At 32, he looked older, worry lines etched deep around his eyes. The pregnancy had been unexpected, a joy that quickly turned to terror when the ultrasounds revealed the problem. "I've been thinking," he said, drying his hands, "about the money situation." Maria's pulse quickened. "What about it?" "My cousin Danny called. He's got a job opportunity up in Alaska, oil pipeline work. The pay is incredible, but I'd have to leave next week, be gone 6 months minimum." Jake turned to face her. "I know the timing is terrible, but Maria, we're drowning here. This could change everything." 6 months. He'd miss the birth, miss everything. Maria felt tears threatening and turned away. "We'll figure something out." "What else is there to figure out? I've applied everywhere, asked everyone I know for work. The bank won't extend the loan, insurance won't cover the surgery." His voice cracked. "I can't just watch our daughter die because we don't have enough money." The words hung between them like a physical weight. Maria closed her eyes, thinking of the bag hidden just feet away. All their problems solved, sitting right there. But how could she explain where it came from? How could she make him understand without sounding completely insane? "Give me a few days," she said finally. "Before you call Danny back. Just a few days to think." Jake moved behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Okay, but Maria, we're running out of time," Dr. Morrison said. "I know what he said." She leaned back against Jake's chest, feeling the baby shift and kick. "I know exactly what he said." That night, after Jake fell asleep, Maria lay staring at the ceiling and listening to the ocean wind rattle the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, a fortune in cash sat hidden in her pantry, and somewhere else, powerful people might already be looking for it. Maria's hands trembled as she stuffed the last bundle of bills into her backpack, the weight of it pulling at her shoulders like gravity itself had intensified. The plane's cabin felt smaller now, suffocating, as if the metal walls were closing in with each passing second. She needed to get out, but her legs felt rooted to the corroded floor. The skeleton in the pilot seat seemed to watch her with hollow sockets, and she found herself whispering an apology to the bones before backing toward the twisted opening she'd crawled through. The wind outside had picked up, whistling through the cliff face with a mournful sound that made her skin crawl. As she squeezed through the gap, her jacket caught on a jagged piece of metal, tearing a long gash in the fabric. She cursed under her breath, then immediately felt guilty for the profanity. Her grandmother would have scolded her, even now, even with everything falling apart. The climb down proved more treacherous than the ascent. The backpack's weight threw off her balance, and twice she nearly lost her footing on the loose rock. By the time she reached the bottom, her palms were scraped raw, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Maria hurried along the beach, glancing back at the cliff every few steps. The plane was invisible from this angle, hidden perfectly in its rocky tomb, but she felt exposed nonetheless, as if eyes were watching from every shadow, every crevice in the stone face above. The walk back to her car stretched endlessly. Each step on the shifting sand seemed to echo too loudly, and she found herself taking the long route around tide pools to avoid leaving clear footprints. Paranoid thinking, maybe, but the money in her backpack felt radioactive, dangerous in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. When she finally reached the parking area, her ancient Honda sat alone under the grey sky like a faithful dog waiting for its owner. She threw the backpack into the trunk with more force than necessary, then stood there staring at the closed lid. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, just sitting in her trunk like groceries or beach towels. The drive home passed in a blur of half-formed thoughts and mounting anxiety. She kept checking the rearview mirror, though for what she couldn't say. The rational part of her mind insisted she was being ridiculous, but rationality felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. At a red light, she pressed a hand to her belly and felt the subtle roundness there, still hidden beneath loose clothing, but growing more pronounced each day. The baby would need everything. Medical care, clothes, a safe place to sleep. The money could provide all of that and more. It could save them both. But where had it come from? The plane looked decades old, from the 60s or 70s maybe, based on its design. Had it been carrying drug money, stolen cash from a bank robbery, payment for something darker? The questions multiplied like cancer cells, each one spawning two more. Her apartment building came into view, its faded brick facade, a welcome sight despite everything. She parked in her usual spot and sat for a moment, gathering courage. The backpack felt heavier when she lifted it from the trunk, as if the money had somehow multiplied during the drive. Inside her studio apartment, Maria dumped the contents of the backpack onto her bed and stared at the fortune spread across her threadbare comforter. In the harsh fluorescent light, the bills looked different somehow, older, more serious. She picked up a bundle and examined it closely. The serial numbers were sequential, she noticed. All the hundreds in one stack shared similar numbering, suggesting they'd come from the same source at the same time. Bank robbery, her mind supplied helpfully, or ransom money. Neither possibility made her feel any better about her situation. She gathered up the bills and stuffed them into an old suitcase, which she shoved under her bed next to boxes of winter clothes she couldn't afford to put in storage. The apartment felt different with the money hidden beneath her mattress, charged with potential energy like the air before a thunderstorm. Maria made herself a cup of tea with shaking hands and sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring out the window at the parking lot below. A dark sedan had pulled up near the building's entrance, and two men in suits were getting out. They moved with purpose, scanning the area with professional thoroughness that made her blood run cold. She ducked below the windowsill, heart racing. They couldn't be here for her. It was impossible. No one had seen her at the cliff, and she'd been careful not to leave traces. The logical explanation was that they were visiting someone else, or maybe they were insurance investigators or government officials on unrelated business. But logic felt thin and insubstantial as she crouched there, listening for footsteps on the stairs outside her door. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a crystalline clarity that made the ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Maria sat at her kitchen table, the duffel bag at her feet like a sleeping beast. She'd barely slept, her mind churning between elation and terror. The money was real. She'd counted it 3 times, $460,000 in weathered bills, enough to pay for the surgery and secure their future. But the newspaper clipping haunted her. The photograph of the young woman, Patricia Donovan, bore an unsettling resemblance to herself, the same dark hair, the same determined jawline. The article mentioned Patricia had been traveling to meet someone important, carrying sensitive documents about municipal contracts. Then she'd vanished. Maria's phone buzzed. Dr. Chen's office, confirming tomorrow's appointment. The weight of her baby pressed against her ribs as she shifted in the chair, a constant reminder of the ticking clock. She had perhaps 2 weeks before the surgery became impossible. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" David called from the shower. His voice carried that forced cheerfulness he'd adopted lately, the tone of a man pretending their world wasn't collapsing. "Fine," she called back, zipping the bag shut. She'd hidden it in the hall closet behind winter coats, but nowhere felt safe enough. After David left for his second job at the marina, Maria found herself driving back toward the cliffs. She told herself she needed to ensure she'd left no trace, but truthfully, she needed to understand what she'd stumbled into. The wreckage might hold more answers. The descent proved easier in daylight, though her growing belly made the climb awkward. The plane sat exactly as she'd left it, a metal tomb keeping its secrets. She approached the cockpit more carefully this time, noting details she'd missed in her frantic search. The pilot's leather jacket hung on the seat back, and she carefully searched the pockets. Her fingers found a small address book, its pages yellowed but legible. She flipped through names and numbers, most meaningless, until she reached the D's. There it was, Donovan, Patricia, with a San Francisco phone number. But it was the entry above Patricia's that made her blood freeze. Castellano, Vincent. The name was circled in red ink, with a note scrawled beside it, payment confirmed. Final meeting Tuesday. Maria knew that name. Everyone on the coast did. Vincent Castellano had been a powerful city councilman for decades, his family's construction business securing lucrative municipal contracts. Even now, in his 80s, his influence stretched through every major development project in 3 counties. Her phone's camera captured every page before she returned the book to the jacket. As she prepared to leave, something glinted in the sand near the plane's tail. She dug carefully, uncovering a tarnished brass compass and, beneath it, a metal tube about the size of a cigar. The tube's contents made her hands shake. Photographs, dozens of them, showing men in expensive suits exchanging envelopes in parking garages and restaurant booths. Documents with municipal letterheads detailing bid specifications before they were publicly announced. Bank records showing payments to shell companies. And, in several photos, a younger Vincent Castellano, his silver hair unmistakable even 30 years later. Patricia Donovan hadn't just been carrying sensitive documents, she'd been carrying evidence of a massive corruption scheme, one that had apparently been worth killing for. The money in the duffel bag wasn't just cash, it was blood money, payment for silence that had been permanently insured when Patricia's plane went down. Maria photographed everything before sealing the documents back in their protective tube. Her mind raced with implications. If Castellano had been willing to commit murder 3 decades ago to protect his secrets, what would he do if he learned someone had found Patricia's evidence? But as she climbed back up the cliff face, another thought crystallized. Castellano was old now, his empire passed to his sons. The statute of limitations had surely expired on most of these crimes. The evidence might be historically damning, but legally worthless. The money, however, remained very real, and if no one had come looking for it in 30 years, perhaps no one would miss it now. By the time she reached her car, Maria had made her decision. She would use the money for the surgery, but she would also insurance. Copies of the photographs stored safely, along with a detailed account of where she'd found them. If anyone came asking questions, she'd have leverage. That evening, she transferred the digital files to a secure cloud account and mailed physical copies to a safety deposit box in the city. David noticed her distraction during dinner but attributed it to pregnancy stress. "Dr. Chen called," he said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "Her office said they had a cancellation tomorrow morning. She can fit you in for the consultation if you want to move it up." Maria nodded, her free hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Tomorrow, she would learn whether her baby could be saved. Tonight, she would decide if she was brave enough or desperate enough to use a dead woman's money to do it. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the coastal town scrubbed clean and glistening under weak sunlight. Maria sat at her kitchen table, staring at the 3 bundles of cash she'd kept from the wreckage. The bills were old but pristine, protected by the metal briefcase that had somehow survived decades in the elements. She'd counted them twice, $15,000, enough to cover the next surgery, maybe buy them a few more months. But the dead man's face haunted her sleep. His empty sockets seemed to follow her around the cramped apartment, asking questions she couldn't answer. A knock at the door made her jump. Maria quickly swept the money into a dish towel and shoved it into the flour canister. Her heart hammered as she peered through the peephole. "Mrs. Santos?" A man in a crisp navy suit stood on her doorstep, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the morning wind. Behind him, a younger woman with cold eyes scanned the hallway. "I'm Detective Morrison. This is Agent Chen. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Maria's mouth went dry. She touched her belly instinctively, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her. "Questions about what? May we come in? It's regarding some activity near the cliffs yesterday." "The coastal patrol. Someone must have seen her truck." Maria opened the door slowly, mind racing. "Of course, though I'm not sure how I can help." Detective Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're investigating reports of someone exploring the restricted areas during the storm. Dangerous territory, especially for someone in your condition." They settled into her small living room, the 2 officials looking absurdly formal against her second-hand furniture. Agent Chen pulled out a tablet, her fingers poised to take notes. "You were seen driving toward Gull Point yesterday afternoon," Morrison continued. "Neighbors mentioned you've been making frequent trips to that area lately." "I like to watch the ocean," Maria said carefully. "It helps with the pregnancy stress. My doctor recommended peaceful environments." "Understandable." Morrison's tone was conversational, almost friendly. "But yesterday's storm was particularly severe. The cliff face took quite a beating. Rangers found evidence of recent rock slides, fresh footprints. Someone was out there during very dangerous conditions." Maria forced herself to maintain eye contact. "That sounds terrifying. Thank God no one was hurt." Agent Chen spoke for the first time, her voice sharp and precise. "Mrs. Santos, are you familiar with the history of that area? Specifically, any aircraft incidents from the 1970s? The question hit like a physical blow. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks and prayed they'd attribute it to pregnancy hormones. "Aircraft? No, I don't think so. Should I be?" "Local records indicate a small plane went missing in 1973, Morrison said, watching her face intently. "Never found. The theory was it went down somewhere along this stretch of coast. How terrible for the families." Maria managed. Indeed. Morrison stood, walking to her window that faced the cliffs. Mrs. Santos, if someone were to discover wreckage from such an incident, it would be crucial they report it immediately. There are federal protocols for aircraft recovery, chain of custody issues. Some crashes involve sensitive materials. The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Maria's palms grew damp as she watched him study her view of the coastline. Of course, she said. Anyone would want to do the right thing. Agent Chen leaned forward. We should mention that interfering with a crash site is a federal offense. Even unknowingly, the penalties can be quite severe, especially if valuable items go missing. However, Morrison added, turning back from the window, cooperation with ongoing investigations is always taken into consideration. People who help us recover important materials often find the government can be quite grateful. They were offering her a deal, turn over whatever she'd found, and they'd go easy on her. But the casual way they'd mentioned federal offenses and valuable materials made her stomach twist. These weren't regular cops investigating trespassing complaints. I appreciate the information, Maria said, rising carefully from her chair. I'll certainly keep it in mind during my future walks. Morrison handed her a business card. The paper felt expensive, heavier than normal cardstock. Mrs. Santos, I hope you understand we're trying to help you here. Some situations can become very complicated very quickly, especially for people with families to protect. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maria's hand moved protectively to her belly again. Thank you for your concern, she said, opening the front door. I hope you find what you're looking for. After they left, Maria deadbolted the door and slumped against it, heart racing. She pulled the money from the flour canister with shaking hands, staring at the bills that suddenly felt radioactive. Whatever she'd stumbled into, it was bigger than a simple plane crash. The dead man in the wreckage hadn't been just any passenger. He'd been carrying something important enough that people were still looking for it 50 years later. Important enough to kill for. The trek back to the wreckage felt different this time. Maria's boots crunched through the frost-covered undergrowth as dawn painted the cliffs in muted greys and pale gold. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with questions about the briefcase and its contents. The bundle of cash remained hidden beneath her mattress, but she couldn't stop thinking about those documents. The ones written in what looked like Russian, the photographs of men in expensive suits, the official-looking seals and stamps that suggested government involvement. She needed answers, and the plane held more secrets than just money. The wreckage looked small in daylight, less mysterious but somehow more ominous. Ice crystals clung to the twisted metal, and she could see details that the shadows had hidden before. Bullet holes riddled the fuselage. This wasn't just a crash, it had been shot down. Maria squeezed through the gap in the hull, her pregnant belly making the passage more difficult than yesterday. Inside, she moved methodically, searching areas she'd ignored in her previous desperation for quick cash. The pilot's remains sat slumped over what remained of the controls, and she forced herself to look closer, swallowing her revulsion. A leather jacket, expensive even by today's standards. No identification, but sewn into the lining, she found something else. A small metal key, tarnished but intact. It looked like it belonged to a safety deposit box. Behind the pilot's seat, she discovered a hidden compartment she'd missed before. Her fingers worked at the mechanism until it clicked open, revealing more documents. These were different. Handwritten notes in English, names and dates, what looked like meeting locations. One name appeared repeatedly, Alexander Volkov. The baby kicked as she leaned forward to examine the papers more closely. Her back ached, and the cramped space made breathing difficult, but she pressed on. One document made her blood run cold, a list of names under the heading Elimination Targets. Most were crossed out in red ink. A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps on loose gravel, careful and deliberate. Maria's heart hammered as she realized how exposed she was, trapped inside the fuselage with only one narrow exit. She gathered the documents quickly, stuffing them inside her jacket. The footsteps stopped just outside the wreckage. "I know you're in there." The voice was calm, almost conversational. Male, with the hint of an accent she couldn't place. "Come out slowly. No sudden movements." Maria's mouth went dry. She pressed herself against the far wall of the cabin, mind racing. How had someone found her? Had they been watching? "My patience has limits," the voice continued. "You've found something that doesn't belong to you, something very valuable that certain people have been looking for." She thought of the cash under her mattress, of Dr. Chen's deadline, of her baby's fragile life hanging in the balance. Without that money, her child would die. She wasn't giving it up without a fight. "I don't know what you're talking about," she called back, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. A low chuckle echoed off the cliff face. Maria Santos, age 26, unemployed, medical bills mounting. "Your baby needs surgery that costs more than you'll make in 5 lifetimes. Quite a predicament." The fact that he knew her name, knew about her situation, sent ice through her veins. This wasn't a random encounter. Someone had been investigating her, watching her. "What do you want?" she managed. "What you took. All of it. The briefcase, the money, and anything else you might have found. Return it all, and you can go back to your quiet desperation. Keep it, and things become complicated." Maria clutched the documents against her chest. Through the gap in the fuselage, she could see movement, a shadow shifting near the cliff edge. Just one person as far as she could tell. If she could get past him, she knew these cliffs better than any outsider. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, buying time while she studied the terrain outside. "Because right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and people who solve problems permanently. The money you found belongs to some very dangerous individuals. They've been patient, but patience runs out." The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maria winced. She thought of Tom, probably still asleep in their cold apartment, unaware that their world was crumbling around them. She thought of the hospital bills, the ticking clock of her pregnancy, the impossible choice between her family's future and their immediate safety. "I need that money," she said finally. "My baby will die without it." "Your baby will definitely die if you keep it," came the reply. "Along with you and anyone else who gets in the way." The shadow moved again, closer to the entrance. Maria made her decision. She grabbed a piece of twisted metal from the floor and positioned herself near the opening. When he came for her, she'd be ready. "Last chance," the voice called. "Come out peacefully." Maria gripped her makeshift weapon tighter and prepared to fight for her child's life. The rain hammered against the cabin windows as Maria counted the bills for the 3rd time, her hands trembling with each stack. $47,000. More money than she'd ever seen in one place, spread across her kitchen table like evidence of a crime she wasn't sure she'd committed yet. Detective Sarah Chen's words echoed in her mind. "Are you sure there's nothing else you want to tell me?" The woman had known something. Maria was certain of it. The way her eyes had lingered on the baby clothes Maria had hastily shoved into a shopping bag, the calculated casualness of her questions about Maria's financial situation. Thunder rolled across the mountains as Maria stuffed the money back into the duffel bag. She couldn't keep it here. Not with the detective sniffing around, not with the growing certainty that someone else knew about the plane. Her phone buzzed. Dr. Morrison's office, probably calling about her missed appointment. She'd been supposed to go in for monitoring today. The baby's heart rate had been irregular at her last visit. Another reminder of how precarious everything was, how desperately she needed the surgery that only this money could buy. She let it go to voicemail and pulled on her rain jacket. The money needed to go somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look. The old Henley place came to mind, abandoned for years after the family moved to Portland. She could hide the bag there temporarily, just until she figured out her next move. The drive through the storm felt like swimming through ink. Her headlights carved weak tunnels through the darkness, illuminating sheets of rain that made the familiar road treacherous. She was halfway to the Henley property when she noticed the headlights behind her. At first, it seemed like coincidence. Another driver brave enough to venture out in this weather. But when she turned off the main road onto the narrow dirt track leading to the abandoned house, the lights turned too. They hung back, far enough that she couldn't make out the vehicle, but close enough to confirm her growing dread. Maria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if sensing her fear. She considered turning around, driving back to town, but where would that leave her? She still needed to hide the money, and now she needed to know who was following her. The Henley house loomed out of the darkness like a broken tooth, its windows dark and empty. Maria pulled around to the back, killing her lights and engine. The other vehicle had stopped at the tree line, its headlights disappearing. Waiting. She grabbed the duffel bag and made a run for the house, rain soaking through her jacket within seconds. The back door hung loose on rusted hinges. Inside, the air smelled of mold and decay. She used her phone's flashlight to navigate through rooms stripped bare by time and vandals. In what had once been the master bedroom, she found a loose floorboard. Perfect. She pried it up with shaking fingers and shoved the bag into the cavity below. The money disappeared into the darkness like a secret being swallowed. A sound from downstairs froze her blood. The soft creak of the front door opening. Maria killed her phone's light and pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. Footsteps moved through the lower floor, deliberate and searching. Whoever it was had a flashlight. She could see the beams sweeping across the walls below. "I know you're here." The voice was male, gravelly, unfamiliar. "We need to talk." Maria held her breath, one hand pressed against her belly. The baby had gone still, as if understanding the need for silence. The footsteps started up the stairs. "You found something that doesn't belong to you. Something that's caused a lot of people a lot of trouble over the years. I'm here to help you understand the situation. Help." The word dripped with menace. Maria looked around desperately. The bedroom had one window, but it faced a 20-foot drop onto broken concrete. The footsteps reached the landing. "The smart thing is to give it back and forget you ever found it. Walk away. Keep yourself and that baby safe." He knew about the baby. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't random. They'd been watching her, studying her, learning her vulnerabilities. The footsteps paused outside the bedroom door. In that moment of silence, Maria made her choice. She rushed the window, fumbling with the rusted latch. It gave way just as the door burst open behind her. Light flooded the room. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." She spun around, squinting in the harsh beam of his flashlight. The man behind it was a shadow, but she could see the gun in his other hand. "Where is it?" Maria pressed back against the window frame, rain spattering through the gap. "I don't know what you're talking about." He laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "The money from the plane, Maria. Don't insult my intelligence. We know you took it." The casual use of her name sent ice through her veins. Maria's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the winding mountain road ahead. The duffel bag sat in the passenger seat like a ticking bomb, its zipper slightly open to reveal the neat stacks of bills within. She'd been driving for 2 hours since leaving the crash site, her mind racing faster than her beat-up Honda could manage on these treacherous curves. The radio crackled with static as she searched for a clear signal, finally landing on a local news station. Her blood turned to ice when the anchor's voice cut through the white noise. The body of local historian Dr. Edmund Carver was discovered this morning in his home office. Police are calling it a suspected homicide. Maria yanked the wheel, pulling over at a scenic overlook. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the baby kicked, responding to her elevated stress. Dr. Carver was dead, the man whose business card she'd found in the wreckage, the man she planned to contact for answers about the plane's history, was gone. This wasn't a coincidence. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed Jake's number. It went straight to voicemail. The second call did the same. Panic clawed at her throat as she remembered his parting words from that morning. "I'll ask around about that plane. Someone at the paper might know something." No, 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 she whispered, speed dialing again. Still nothing. The mountain wind howled through the canyon below, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something that made her skin crawl. She was being watched. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to run, but where could she go? Home felt like a trap now, and Jake wasn't answering his phone. A black SUV appeared in her rearview mirror, moving too slowly for the empty road. Maria's breath caught as she watched it maintain a careful distance, neither passing nor turning off. Her hands found her belly protectively as the baby shifted inside her, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them. She pulled back onto the road, testing her suspicion by taking the next exit. The SUV followed. Her mouth went dry as she navigated through the small mountain town of Cedar Falls, taking random turns down residential streets lined with modest homes and overgrown gardens. The SUV stayed 3 cars back, professional and patient. At a red light, Maria caught a glimpse of the driver in her side mirror. A woman with short blonde hair and sunglasses, her hands steady on the wheel. Too steady, too calm. This wasn't some paranoid delusion brought on by pregnancy hormones and guilt. Someone was actually following her. The light turned green, and Maria made a split-second decision. She floored the accelerator, tires squealing as she shot through the intersection, and took a hard right into an alley behind a row of shops. Her car bounced over potholes as she navigated the narrow passage, emerging onto a parallel street just as the SUV rounded the corner she'd abandoned. She had maybe 30 seconds. Maria spotted the Cedar Falls Public Library and made another desperate turn into its parking lot, abandoning her car behind the building. She grabbed the duffel bag and her purse, moving as quickly as her pregnant body would allow toward the library's rear entrance. The elderly librarian looked up with concern as Maria rushed inside, clearly distressed and out of breath. "Are you all right, dear? Should I call someone?" "I'm fine," Maria lied, forcing a smile. "Just need to use your computer for a few minutes. Research for a family tree project." The librarian nodded, directing her to a computer terminal tucked away in the reference section. Maria settled into the chair, the duffel bag clutched against her side, and began searching for information about Dr. Edmund Carver. The local newspaper's online archives painted a picture of a respected academic who specialized in regional history, particularly aviation incidents from the 1970s and 80s. His most recent article, published just 3 days ago, was titled "Unsolved Mysteries of the Cascade Range, When History Disappears." Maria's vision blurred as she read the opening paragraph. Some secrets are buried so deep that disturbing them costs lives. In 1983, a private aircraft vanished without a trace during what should have been a routine flight from Seattle to Portland. No wreckage was ever found, no bodies recovered, and no explanation given for why a plane carrying 3 passengers simply ceased to exist. The article went on to detail the passengers: Senator Robert Ashford, known for his anti-corruption stance, his aide, Jennifer Walsh, and pilot Marcus Chen. According to Carver's research, all 3 had been involved in exposing a money laundering operation that reached into the highest levels of state government. Maria's vision tunneled as the implications hit her. The money in the bag wasn't just stolen, it was blood money. The plane hadn't crashed, it had been brought down to silence the people who threatened to expose something massive. And now she was holding the evidence. Through the library window, she spotted the black SUV cruising slowly through the parking lot, its driver scanning the area with predatory patience. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like stepping into a tomb. Maria's footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as she made her way deeper into the shadows, clutching the burner phone Jake had given her. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to find another way, but the memory of Dr. Harrison's grim expression kept her moving forward. "You came alone. Good." The voice emerged from behind a stack of rusted machinery. A man stepped into the dim light filtering through broken windows, tall, gaunt, with eyes that had seen too much. "I'm Carter. Jake said you found something that belongs to some very dangerous people." Maria's hand instinctively moved to her belly. I found a plane. From 1987. There was money inside and... Stop! Carter held up his hand, his gaze darting toward the warehouse entrance. Not here. Too exposed. He motioned for her to follow him toward a makeshift office in the corner, its walls constructed from shipping containers. Jake told me about the senator's involvement. What he didn't tell me was how much you actually know. Inside the cramped space, Carter pulled out a thick manila folder. Senator Richard Blackwood wasn't always the pillar of virtue he pretends to be. In the 80s, he was hungry, ambitious, and willing to make deals with people who should have been his enemies. Maria sat on an overturned crate, her legs suddenly weak. What kind of deals? Arms trafficking, drug money laundering. The plane you found was supposed to disappear forever, along with everyone who knew about its cargo. Carter opened the folder, revealing photographs of a younger Blackwood shaking hands with men in expensive suits. That money you took? It was payment for weapons that ended up in the hands of paramilitary groups in Central America. Blood money. Quite literally. The baby kicked hard against Maria's ribs, as if sensing her distress. But why kill people now? It was so long ago. Because Blackwood is about to be nominated for Secretary of Defense. The president's announcement is scheduled for next week. If this comes out, it doesn't just destroy him, it brings down everyone connected to the operation. Carter leaned forward, his voice dropping. And there are people in very high places who are part of this network, people with the resources to make problems disappear permanently. Maria's mouth went dry. Tommy found out somehow. That's why they killed him. Tommy Morrison was a good man who asked the wrong questions at the wrong time. He'd been investigating corruption in local government contracts, and somewhere along the way, he stumbled onto a connection between current city projects and shell companies that traced back to the original money laundering operation. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. The development project near the cliffs, the one that would have disturbed the crash site. Exactly. Blackwood and his associates needed that plane to stay buried. When Tommy started digging into the project's financing, they had to silence him. Carter pulled out another photograph, Tommy at his desk, surrounded by papers. He was building a case, but he didn't realize how deep the corruption went, or how far these people would go to protect themselves. Maria stood abruptly, pacing the small space. I can't do this. I can't fight these kinds of people. I just need enough money for my baby's surgery, and then I'll disappear. I'll never say anything about what I found. Carter's laugh was bitter. You think they'll let you walk away? You've seen the money. You know where it came from. In their minds, you're already a dead woman. He stood, moving to a small safe hidden behind a false panel. The only way you survive this is if you help us expose them first. Us? I've been working with a federal task force for 3 years, building a case against this network. Tommy's murder gave us the opening we needed, but we need proof. Hard evidence that connects the money you found to Blackwood and his associates. From the safe, Carter withdrew a small recording device. This has everything Tommy discovered before they killed him. Combined with the serial numbers from the money you found, it might be enough to bring them down. But we need you to help us get closer to Blackwood. Maria stared at the device. How? There's going to be a fundraising gala tomorrow night at the Riverside Hotel. Blackwood will be there, along with several of his old associates. We need someone on the inside, someone they don't suspect. Carter's eyes met hers. Someone who looks like just another desperate person in need of help. The warehouse suddenly felt even colder. You want me to get close to the people who murdered Tommy while I'm pregnant? I want you to save your baby and prevent these people from killing anyone else. Because if Blackwood gets that cabinet position, this network will have power beyond anything they've had before. Carter stepped closer. They're planning something bigger, Maria. Something that will make their past crimes look like shoplifting. Outside, the sound of a car engine echoed through the empty industrial district. Carter immediately tensed, moving to the window. We're out of time. They've found us. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like stepping into a tomb. Maria's footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as she made her way through the maze of rusted machinery and forgotten crates, the duffel bag heavy against her shoulder. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every creak of the building's aging bones made her pulse spike. She'd chosen this place carefully, somewhere public enough that witnesses would deter violence, but isolated enough for a private conversation. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was meeting criminals in a place that looked like every crime scene from every movie she'd ever watched. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. Even her unborn child seemed to sense the danger they were walking into. "You came alone. Good." The voice emerged from the shadows before the man did. Victor Reeves stepped into the pale light filtering through the dirty windows, his expensive suit incongruous against the industrial decay. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, their hands resting casually near their jacket openings. "I keep my promises," Maria said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Do you?" Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That depends entirely on what you've brought me." He nodded toward the bag. "All of it? Most of it." Maria set the duffel bag on a nearby crate but kept her hand on the strap. "Enough to buy my family's safety." "Most isn't all, Miss Santos." Victor's tone carried the same casual menace she remembered from their phone conversation. "We discussed this. Every bill, every bond. Complete recovery. And I told you that wasn't possible." Maria opened the bag, revealing stacks of weathered currency. "There's nearly 2 million here. More than enough to satisfy whoever you represent." One of Victor's men stepped forward, but Victor held up a hand. "The money isn't the only issue, you understand. There are complications, people who know about this situation." Maria's blood chilled. "What people?" "Your journalist friend, for instance. Mr. Hayes has been asking very inconvenient questions around town. Questions about old accidents, missing persons, financial irregularities from decades past." Victor began walking in a slow circle around her. "Journalists can be terribly persistent, can't they? Jake doesn't know anything specific. I made sure of that." "Perhaps. But his investigation has attracted attention. The wrong kind of attention." Victor stopped directly in front of her. "There are people who prefer the past to remain buried, Miss Santos. Powerful people who've spent considerable effort ensuring certain events never come to light, then take the money and ensure it. That's what you do, isn't it? Make problems disappear?" Victor laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Oh, my dear, you have no idea what you've stumbled into. This isn't about stolen money or even a crashed plane. This is about a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government. People who would kill a pregnant woman without a second thought if it meant protecting themselves." The warehouse suddenly felt colder. Maria pulled her jacket tighter, trying to stop the trembling that had nothing to do with temperature. "Who are these people?" "Names you'd recognize, faces you've seen on television, in newspapers, people who were young and ambitious 30 years ago who made a deal with the devil and have been paying the price ever since." Victor's eyes glittered in the dim light. "The plane you found wasn't carrying stolen money, Miss Santos. It was carrying blackmail material. Evidence of crimes that would topple governments." "That's impossible. I went through everything. It was just cash and—" Maria stopped, remembering the documents she'd barely glanced at, the ones written in languages she didn't recognize. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that gets people elected, and the kind that gets them killed when it surfaces." Victor gestured to his men. "Which brings us to our current dilemma. Simply returning the money isn't sufficient anymore. Too many people know, too many loose ends. You promised me safety if I returned the money." "I promised to try, but circumstances have changed." Victor's expression almost looked sympathetic. "There's been a development. Your friend Mr. Hayes published a story this morning. Nothing specific, mind you, but enough to create concern. People are now actively looking for what you found." Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. Jake had promised to wait, to let her handle this first. "What story?" "Something about mysterious financial transactions in the area, unexplained wealth appearing in certain accounts. He's connected it to several suspicious deaths over the years. Victor shook his head. Very thorough work, really. Very dangerous work. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic and Maria's labored breathing. She could feel the walls closing in, the careful plans she'd made crumbling around her. "What do you want from me?" Victor smiled again, and this time Maria saw something that terrified her more than anger or threats. She saw pity. "I want you to understand, Miss Santos, that some secrets are worth more than money. Some secrets are worth everything." The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, its broken windows casting fractured shadows across the concrete floor. Maria pressed herself against a shipping container, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. The duffel bag of money felt impossibly heavy on her shoulder, every bill inside a potential death sentence. "I know you're in here, Maria." Vincent's voice carried easily through the empty building, calm and patient as a predator stalking wounded prey. "There's no point in running anymore. We found your little hideout, your pathetic attempt at insurance." She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. The photographs and documents she'd so carefully hidden, her only leverage, were gone. Without them, she was just a pregnant woman with stolen money, cornered and defenseless. "The senator is very disappointed," Vincent continued, his footsteps moving methodically between the containers. "He trusted you to be reasonable, to take the generous offer and disappear quietly. But you had to go digging, didn't you? Had to play detective." Maria's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her terror. She had to survive this, had to find a way out, not for herself anymore, but for the innocent life depending on her. A memory flashed through her mind. Jake mentioning the old loading dock, how the floor was rotted through near the water. If she could reach it, maybe she could find another way out. The main entrance was blocked, but there might be a service exit she'd missed. She slipped between containers, moving as quietly as possible toward the back of the warehouse. Her phone buzzed softly, a text from Jake. "Police on the way, stay hidden." Hope flickered, but Vincent's voice crushed it immediately. "Your boyfriend called the cops, didn't he? Smart boy. Unfortunately for him, half the responding officers are on our payroll. The other half will find a very different scene when they arrive." Maria's blood turned to ice. They weren't just corrupt, they were completely embedded in the system. There would be no rescue, no dramatic arrival of honest police. Whatever happened here, she was on her own. She reached the loading dock area, scanning desperately for an escape route. The floor here was indeed rotted, with gaps revealing dark water below. But there was no exit, just broken windows 30 feet above the bay. Even if she could make the fall, the shock would likely kill the baby. "You know what the beautiful thing about corruption is, Maria?" Vincent's voice was closer now, maybe 2 containers away. "It's not just about money. It's about control. Senator Blackwood doesn't just own politicians. He owns judges, police commissioners, federal investigators. Even if you somehow survived tonight, even if you found new evidence, who would you tell? Who would believe you?" She spotted something that made her pulse quicken. A service ladder leading to a catwalk overhead. It looked old and dangerous, but it might give her a way to double back toward the entrance while Vincent searched the ground level. Moving carefully, she grabbed the first rung. The metal groaned under her weight but held. She climbed slowly, the duffel bag making every movement awkward and precarious. The pilot's name was Marcus Webb, Vincent said conversationally, apparently unaware of her position. Good man, loyal, but he developed a conscience about the cargo he was carrying. Started asking questions about the senator's business arrangements with some very dangerous people, so we arranged for him to have an accident. Maria reached the catwalk and crept along it, trying to stay silent. Below, she could see Vincent moving systematically through the maze of containers, a gun held casually in his right hand. Webb didn't die in the crash, you know. Survived long enough to hide the money, the clever bastard. It took us years to track down that plane. We had people searching every inch of coastline, checking with local fishermen, monitoring salvage operations, and then you stumbled across it like some fairy tale treasure hunter. The catwalk extended toward the front of the warehouse, but there was a gap. maybe 8 feet to the next section. In her condition, attempting the jump would be suicide. Vincent stopped directly below her position. "The money you found?" That was just the beginning. Webb was carrying evidence of transactions worth hundreds of millions. Arms deals, drug shipments, human trafficking routes. The senator's real portfolio. Without that evidence, we're vulnerable. With it destroyed, we're untouchable. Maria realized with growing horror that she'd never understood the true scope of what she'd discovered. This wasn't just about corruption or campaign funds. This was about a criminal empire that reached into every level of government and law enforcement. A board creaked under her foot. Vincent looked up instantly, their eyes meeting across the dusty air. For a moment neither moved. Then he smiled, a cold, professional expression that chilled her to the bone. "There you are," he said, raising his weapon. "Come down, Maria. Let's finish this properly." The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Maria pressed herself against a support beam, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. The duffel bag felt impossibly heavy in her grip, the weight of secrets and blood money threatening to drag her down. "I know you're here," Maria Henderson's voice carried across the warehouse, calm and conversational. "There's nowhere left to run." She closed her eyes, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her. 3 days had passed since she'd fled her apartment, 3 days of sleeping in her car and moving from one hiding spot to another. The money had become a curse, marking her for death while representing her child's only chance at life. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into," Henderson continued, his footsteps drawing closer. "That money isn't just cash, it's evidence of something much bigger than you can imagine." Maria peered around the beam. Henderson stood 50 feet away, a gun held casually at his side. Behind him, 2 other men flanked the warehouse's main entrance. She recognized one of them, the same man who'd been watching her apartment building. "The plane crash in 1987 wasn't an accident," Henderson called out. "Senator Blackwood was carrying documents that would have brought down half the government. The money was just a bonus, insurance to keep certain people quiet." A chill ran down Maria's spine. She'd suspected the crash was connected to something larger, but hearing it confirmed made the danger feel suffocatingly real. "Blackwood was going to testify before a Senate committee," Henderson continued. "Industrial espionage, illegal weapons sales, politicians taking money from foreign governments. The whole rotten system was about to be exposed." Maria shifted position, trying to move deeper into the warehouse's shadows. Her foot scraped against a piece of debris, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Henderson's head snapped toward the noise. "There you are." She bolted, clutching the duffel bag as she ran toward the rear of the building. Behind her, shouts erupted as Henderson's men gave chase. The warehouse was larger than she'd realized, filled with rusted machinery and abandoned equipment that created a maze of hiding spots. "You can't protect that child if you're dead," Henderson shouted. "Be smart about this, Maria. Give us the money and walk away." She ducked behind an old conveyor belt, gasping for breath. Her phone vibrated, a text from Detective Ross. "Where are you? Found something important about the crash." Maria's fingers trembled as she typed back, "Warehouse on Industrial Row. Henderson here with men. Has guns?" The response came immediately, "On my way. Stay hidden." "We know about your medical bills." Henderson's voice was closer now, maybe 30 feet away. "The experimental treatment your baby needs. You think that money will save your child, but it won't do any good if you're not around to use it." She crept forward, staying low behind the machinery. An exit sign glowed red in the distance, a back door she hadn't noticed before. If she could reach it without being seen, she might have a chance. The documents Blackwood was carrying implicated 12 senators, 6 congressmen, and 3 federal judges. Henderson continued his monologue. "People who are still alive, still in power. They've spent 35 years believing their secrets were buried in those cliffs." Maria reached the edge of the conveyor belt. 20 feet of open space stretched between her and the next piece of cover. She took a deep breath, preparing to run. The interesting thing about secrets, Henderson said, his voice now coming from directly behind her, is that they're only dangerous when someone knows about them. She spun around to find him standing there, gun pointed at her chest. His expression was almost sympathetic, like a doctor delivering terminal news. "You seem like a good person," he said quietly. "A mother trying to save her child. I respect that. But this is bigger than one baby, bigger than one family. National security trumps personal tragedy every time. Those people you're protecting," Maria whispered, "they're criminals. They're patriots who made difficult choices during a difficult time. The Cold War required moral flexibility that people like you can't understand." The baby kicked hard, as if responding to her terror. Maria pressed her free hand to her belly, thinking of all the dreams she'd had for this child, all the plans that might die here in this rotting warehouse. "The money," Henderson said, extending his hand. Before Maria could respond, the warehouse's main lights suddenly blazed on, flooding the space with harsh fluorescent brightness. Car doors slammed outside, followed by the sound of running feet. "Police! Building is surrounded." Henderson's calm demeanor cracked. He grabbed Maria's arm, pressing the gun against her temple as sirens wailed in the distance. "Looks like we're doing this the hard way," he muttered, dragging her toward the shadows as shouts echoed through the warehouse. The cabin's floorboards creaked under Maria's restless pacing as dawn broke through the grimy windows. Her phone had been silent for 3 hours since Jake's last text. They found the car, moving to fallback position. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her anxiety. Detective Morrison sat hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he scrolled through decades of missing persons reports. The yellow legal pad beside him was covered in notes, timestamps, and question marks. Every few minutes he'd glance up at Maria with the look of a man piecing together a puzzle that grew more disturbing with each connection. "Maria, sit down," he said without looking up. "You're making me nervous, and that's saying something." She ignored him, moving to the window for the 100th time. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, but somewhere out there, people were hunting them. People with resources, connections, and a willingness to kill that spanned generations. "I should never have dragged you into this," she muttered, one hand pressed against the glass. "You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to dig deeper when I should have filed a routine report." Morrison's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "And now I know why every instinct I had was screaming at me to walk away." Maria turned from the window. "What did you find?" Morrison's face was pale in the laptop's glow. "The passenger manifest for that flight was never officially filed, but I found insurance claims, family inquiries, corporate records that paint a picture." He paused, running a hand through his grey hair. 5 passengers besides the pilot, 2 pharmaceutical executives, an FDA inspector, and 2 congressional staffers. What were they doing together? That's where it gets interesting. In 1987, there was a congressional hearing scheduled about accelerated drug approval processes. Big Pharma was pushing for faster pathways to market, claiming they could save lives by cutting through red tape. Morrison's voice dropped. The hearing was postponed indefinitely after the plane disappeared. Maria sank into the chair across from him, the weight of understanding settling over her like a shroud. They weren't flying to a meeting, they were flying away from one. The FDA inspector's name was Dr. Sarah Chen. Her preliminary report on the drug trials was supposed to be submitted the week after the plane vanished. I found fragments of her work in archived files. She'd discovered falsified data, bribery, potentially thousands of deaths that could have been prevented. The baby's movements became more agitated, and Maria pressed both hands to her belly. "So they killed them all. Made it look like an accident, bad weather, mechanical failure, pilot error, pick your story. The official investigation was perfunctory at best. Case closed, files buried, truth forgotten." Morrison closed the laptop with a sharp click. "Except for that briefcase full of evidence you found. And now they want it back. They want it destroyed, along with anyone who's seen it." Maria's phone buzzed, and she grabbed it with trembling fingers. Jake's name flashed on the screen, but the message made her blood freeze, not Jake. "We have him. Cabin surrounded. Come out alone or he dies. You have 10 minutes. She stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, hoping they would change. Morrison saw her expression and reached for his service weapon. "How many?" he asked. "I don't know. They have Jake." Her voice cracked on his name. Could be a bluff. Could be... The sharp crack of a rifle shot split the morning air, and the kitchen window exploded in a shower of glass. Morrison dove sideways, pulling Maria down with him as another shot punched through the cabin's thin walls. "Doesn't sound like a bluff," he grunted, army crawling toward the back door. Maria's phone buzzed again. 9 minutes. "There's a root cellar behind the cabin," Morrison whispered. "If we can make it there—" "No." Maria struggled to her feet, despite his protests. "I'm done running. I'm done letting other people die for their secrets. Maria, don't be stupid. You can't trust them." "I can't trust anyone." She moved toward the front door, her hand on the knob. "But Jake risked everything to help me. I won't let him die because I was too scared to face this." Morrison grabbed her arm. "The briefcase is worthless if we're all dead." She shook him off. "Get to that root cellar. If this goes bad, you're the only one who knows the truth. Don't let it die with us." Another shot shattered the remaining front window, followed by an amplified voice. 6 minutes, Maria. Your boyfriend's getting impatient." She closed her eyes, feeling the baby's steady heartbeat against her palm. 3 lives hanging in the balance, and all of it traced back to a plane that should have stayed lost in those cliffs. The money she'd thought would save them had become their death sentence. Maria opened the door and stepped into the morning light, hands raised, walking toward whatever waited in the trees. The warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Maria pressed herself against the cold metal wall, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it would give her away. The baby kicked frantically, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. She could hear footsteps echoing through the vast space, careful, measured steps that belonged to someone who knew exactly what they were hunting. Through a gap in the shipping containers, she caught glimpses of Marcus Webb moving methodically through the maze of abandoned equipment, a pistol held steady in his grip. "I know you're here, Maria," his voice carried across the empty space, calm and conversational. "There's nowhere left to run. Detective Santos is already dead, and your husband—" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Well, let's just say his situation depends entirely on your cooperation." Maria's blood turned to ice. She fumbled for her phone with trembling fingers, but there was no signal in this metal tomb. The recording she'd made of Webb's confession was useless if she couldn't get it to anyone who mattered. A crash echoed from the far side of the warehouse, something heavy falling or being knocked over. Webb's footsteps quickened, moving away from her position. Maria seized the moment, slipping between 2 containers and making her way toward what looked like an office area elevated above the main floor. The stairs were metal grating that would announce every step. She had no choice but to trust that the ambient noise of the old building would mask her movements. Each step sent vibrations through her bones, and she paused halfway up when a particularly loud creak rang out. Webb's footsteps stopped. Maria held her breath, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles went white. Seconds stretched into eternity before the footsteps resumed, moving in a different direction. The office was a glass-walled box filled with abandoned furniture and papers yellowed with age. More importantly, it offered a view of most of the warehouse floor. Maria crouched behind an overturned desk, scanning for any sign of escape routes she might have missed. That's when she saw them. 3 figures moving through the shadows near the main entrance, and one of them was David. Her relief was so overwhelming she almost cried out, catching herself just in time. He was alive, but from this distance she couldn't tell if he was injured or if the men flanking him were friend or foe. Touching, Webb's voice came from directly below the office. "A rescue attempt, though I'm afraid it's a bit late for heroics." Maria's blood chilled as she realized Webb had spotted them too. She watched in horror as he positioned himself behind a concrete pillar with a clear line of sight to the entrance. David and his companions, she could see now that one was Detective Rodriguez from Santos's precinct, were walking into an ambush. Without thinking, Maria grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the desk and hurled it through the office window. The explosion of glass echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot, and Webb spun around, his attention diverted just as David and Rodriguez dove for cover. "Maria!" David's voice carried across the space, filled with relief and terror. "How romantic," Webb called out, now caught between two positions. "But this changes nothing. Senator Harrison's secrets stay buried, along with everyone who's learned them." "It's over, Webb," Rodriguez shouted from behind a forklift. "We have backup coming, and we know about Harrison's connection to the crash." Webb's laugh was cold and sharp. "You have nothing. Some old cash and a pregnant woman's desperate theories. Harrison will be in the White House within 2 years, and this will all be forgotten." Maria knew she had to move. From her elevated position, she could see that Webb was trapped but armed, and any standoff would only give him time to think of another way out. The baby kicked again, and she made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, she would get them both through this. A service ladder attached to the back wall of the office led up to the warehouse's industrial ventilation system. If she could reach it without being seen, she might be able to work her way around to a better position, or at least draw Webb away from David and Rodriguez. She was halfway to the ladder when Webb's voice stopped her cold. "Maria, darling, I can see you moving around up there. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come down here, nice and slow, or I'm going to put a bullet through your husband's chest. You have 10 seconds to decide." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of wind through broken windows. Maria looked down at David, saw the desperate love in his eyes, saw Rodriguez calculating angles and distances with the trained eye of a cop who knew the odds weren't good. 9 seconds. 8. The baby kicked once more, and Maria made her choice. The safe house felt like a tomb. Maria pressed her face against the dusty window, watching shadows shift in the alley below. Every car that passed made her heart skip. Every footstep in the hallway above sent ice through her veins. 3 days had passed since Detective Chen brought her here. 3 days of waiting while her world crumbled outside these walls. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table. Chen's name flashed on the screen. "We've got movement." His voice was tight with urgency. Castellanos just walked into FBI headquarters with his lawyer. Maria's hand instinctively moved to her belly. "What does that mean?" "It means he's trying to cut a deal before we can build our case. We need to move faster than planned." Papers rustled on his end. "I'm coming to get you. Pack light." "Where are we going?" "To end this." 20 minutes later, Chen's unmarked sedan pulled into the alley. Maria slipped into the passenger seat, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles whitened against the steering wheel. "Tell me everything," she said. Chen navigated through downtown traffic with practiced efficiency. Castellanos is spinning a story about being blackmailed by unknown parties. Claims he was forced to launder money through his construction projects. He's painting himself as another victim. But you have evidence. We have pieces. Financial records, witness statements, some communications. But Castellanos has had 40 years to cover his tracks. Chen's phone rang. He glanced at the display and answered. "Chen here." Maria caught fragments of the conversation, urgent whispers about immunity deals and missing witnesses. When Chen hung up, his expression had darkened. "2 of our key witnesses just recanted their statements. Suddenly they can't remember anything about suspicious cash payments or intimidation tactics." The weight of inevitability settled over Maria like a shroud. "He's getting away with it. Not if we can help it." Chen turned onto a tree-lined street she didn't recognize. "There's someone who wants to meet you." They pulled up to a modest coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Through the window, Maria spotted an elderly woman sitting alone at a corner table, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Something about her seemed familiar. Who is she? Eleanor Martinez. She was Thomas Wade's secretary at the time of the crash. Chen turned off the engine. She's been carrying secrets for 40 years. Inside the coffee shop, Eleanor Martinez looked up as they approached. Her eyes were sharp despite her age, and they fixed on Maria with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "You look like your mother," Eleanor said softly, gesturing for them to sit. Maria's breath caught. "You knew my mother?" "Isabel was my neighbor's daughter. Sweet girl, always helping others." Eleanor's weathered hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "I knew her before she got mixed up with the Castellanos family." The revelation hit Maria like a physical blow. "Mixed up how?" Eleanor glanced around the coffee shop, ensuring they weren't overheard. "She worked as a housekeeper for Vincent's father. That's how she learned about the money, about what really happened to that plane." Chen leaned forward. "Mrs. Martinez, we need to know everything. I should have spoken up years ago." Eleanor's voice trembled with regret, but I was scared. Vincent made it clear what happened to people who asked too many questions. She reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope. "After Isabel died, I kept these. I thought someday they might matter." Maria's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, her mother cleaning offices, standing beside filing cabinets, and one image that made her blood run cold, her mother holding a baby that was unmistakably Maria herself, standing in front of a building she now recognized as Castellanos Construction Headquarters. "She was gathering evidence," Eleanor continued. "Isabel knew about the plane crash, about the money laundering operation. She was planning to expose everything. What stopped her?" Chen asked. "She got sick. Cancer." Eleanor's eyes glistened. "But before she died, she made me promise to keep these safe. She said someday her daughter might need them." Maria stared at a photograph of her mother standing beside a man in an expensive suit. The man's face was turned toward the camera, and even 40 years younger, Vincent Castellanos was unmistakable. "There's more," Eleanor said, pulling out a small recording device. Isabel recorded her conversations with Vincent's father. "Insurance," she called it. Chen's eyes widened. "Does Castellanos know these exist?" "He suspects." "Why do you think he's been so desperate to find that money?" "It's not just about the cash. It's about eliminating every trace of evidence that could connect him to the original crime." Maria felt pieces of her life rearranging themselves, forming a picture she'd never imagined. Her mother hadn't abandoned her secrets carelessly. She'd left breadcrumbs, a trail for Maria to follow when the time was right. "What do we do now?" Maria asked. Chen was already reaching for his phone. "We take this to the FBI before Castellanos finishes making his deal." The lighthouse beams swept across the churning waters below as Maria pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Vincent's men had found her sanctuary, the abandoned keeper's quarters where she'd hidden after fleeing the marina. Through the cracked window, she could see their flashlight beams dancing across the rocky path like malevolent fireflies. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Chen, Coast Guard en route. "Stay hidden. Evidence confirms everything." Maria's hands trembled as she clutched the manila envelope containing copies of the flight manifests, banking records, and Senator Morrison's correspondence that she'd managed to photograph before Vincent's arrival at the crash site. The original documents were now in Chen's possession, but Maria knew Vincent wouldn't stop until he silenced the only living witness to his decades-old secret. The baby stirred restlessly in her womb, as if sensing the danger. Maria whispered a silent promise that they would survive this night, that the money hidden in various safe deposit boxes across 3 counties would fund the medical treatment her child desperately needed, if she lived to access it. Heavy footsteps echoed on the lighthouse stairs. Vincent's voice carried through the salt air, calm and measured despite the chaos. "Maria, this doesn't have to end badly. You're a mother protecting her child. I respect that. But you've stumbled into something much larger than your personal struggles." She closed her eyes, remembering the newspaper clipping she'd found in the wreckage. The headline about the missing federal prosecutor who'd been investigating campaign finance violations in 1987. Thomas Brennan had been carrying evidence that could have destroyed Senator Morrison's career and exposed a money laundering operation that stretched from local construction contracts to international arms deals. The plane crash hadn't been an accident, it had been murder disguised as mechanical failure. The statute of limitations expired long ago, Vincent continued, his voice growing closer. But certain people have built their entire lives on the foundation of that secret. They won't let one desperate woman tear it all down. Maria knew he was lying about the statute of limitations. Murder had no expiration date, and the financial crimes were ongoing. She'd seen the recent bank transfers, the shell companies still operating under Morrison's network. The senator wasn't just protecting his past, he was protecting his present. A floorboard creaked directly below her hiding spot. Maria held her breath, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the emergency flare gun she'd found in the lighthouse keeper's emergency kit. Through the gaps in the wooden floor, she could see the top of a man's head, silver hair gleaming in the flashlight beam. "You know, Maria, I've been thinking about your situation," Vincent said conversationally. A single mother, facing astronomical medical bills, desperate enough to claim salvage rights on a 40-year-old crash site. It's quite entrepreneurial, actually. But you've been asking the wrong questions. The lighthouse beam swept past the window again, and in its brief illumination, Maria saw Coast Guard vessels approaching the rocky shoreline. Chen had kept her word, but Maria wasn't sure help would arrive in time. "The right question isn't who died in that crash," Vincent continued. "It's who was supposed to die, but didn't. Thomas Brennan wasn't traveling alone that night. He had a partner, another federal prosecutor who was supposed to be on that flight, but changed his plans at the last minute." Maria's blood turned to ice. She thought about Detective Chen's eagerness to help, her intimate knowledge of the case details, her insistence on meeting privately to review evidence. That prosecutor spent the next 40 years building a career, eventually becoming police commissioner, then chief of detectives. He's been very helpful in keeping certain files buried, certain investigations stalled. Vincent's voice held a note of satisfaction. "Did you really think it was coincidence that Detective Chen found you so quickly after you reported the crash site?" The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Chen hadn't been protecting Maria. She'd been monitoring her, feeding information back to Morrison's network. The evidence Maria had handed over was now in the hands of the very people she was trying to expose. Heavy boots clattered up the lighthouse stairs toward her hiding spot. Maria gripped the flare gun tighter, knowing she had perhaps seconds before Vincent's men reached her level. The Coast Guard boats were still too far away, their searchlights sweeping uselessly across empty water. But as the footsteps reached the landing below, Maria heard something else. The distinctive whistle of incoming helicopters. Through the window she saw federal agency markings on the aircraft, not Coast Guard vessels as Chen had promised. Vincent's voice carried a new edge of concern. "It seems Detective Chen wasn't the only one you contacted, Maria. Very clever, but federal agencies move slowly and accidents can happen so quickly in places like this." The lighthouse door burst open with explosive force. The lighthouse keeper's cottage groaned against the storm winds as Maria pressed her back against the stone wall, clutching the evidence that would finally expose Senator Harrison's decades-old conspiracy. Through the rain-lashed windows, she could see headlights cutting through the darkness. They'd found her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Chen, FBI en route. "Hold position." But Maria knew 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. Harrison's men were already surrounding the cottage, their shadowy forms moving between the trees like predators closing in on wounded prey. She placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling the baby's reassuring movement beneath her palm. The front door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. 3 armed men rushed inside, their weapons trained on every corner. Maria held her breath in the narrow space behind the chimney, the leather satchel containing flight manifests and photographs pressed against her chest like a shield. "Spread out," commanded a gravelly voice she recognized as Vincent Torres, Harrison's chief enforcer. "She's here somewhere. Find her and the documents." Heavy boots echoed across the wooden floors above as they searched room by room. Maria knew she had minutes before they discovered her hiding spot. The cottage's previous owner had carved this secret compartment during Prohibition, smuggling liquor past federal agents. Now it sheltered a different kind of contraband, the truth. Through a crack in the stones, she watched Torres examine the cottage's layout with cold efficiency. His scarred face remained emotionless as he directed his men, but Maria could sense his desperation. Harrison's presidential campaign was gaining momentum, and these revelations would destroy everything they'd built on the foundation of murder and cover-ups. A floorboard creaked directly overhead. One of the gunmen was in the bedroom where she'd been hiding just minutes earlier. They'd find the warm impression her body had left in the dust, the footprints leading toward the fireplace. "Sir, she was here recently," called a voice from upstairs. "Tracks lead downstairs." Torres's eyes swept the main room, lingering on the massive stone hearth. Maria's pulse hammered against her throat as his gaze passed over her hiding spot. The baby kicked, as if sensing the danger, and she bit her lip to stifle a gasp. Her phone vibrated silently. Another message from Chen. "Stall them. 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. An eternity." Torres approached the fireplace, his weathered hand trailing along the stones. "This place has secrets," he murmured, more to himself than his men. "Old houses always do." He began pressing against different stones, searching for hidden mechanisms. Maria realized with growing horror that he knew about smugglers' caves and secret compartments. Her sanctuary was becoming her tomb. Outside, the storm intensified, rain drumming against the windows like machine gun fire. Lightning illuminated the cottage in stark, strobing flashes, casting dancing shadows that made every movement seem amplified. "Check the basement," Torres ordered. She might have found another way out. As footsteps receded toward the cellar stairs, Torres remained at the fireplace. His fingers found the loose stone that concealed the compartment's trigger mechanism. Maria's heart stopped, but instead of pressing it, he paused, tilting his head as if listening to something beyond the storm's fury. Car engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. "FBI!" The shout echoed from outside, followed by the slam of car doors. "Surround the building!" Torres cursed and barked orders into his radio. "Extraction, now! We're blown!" The gunmen upstairs came thundering down, their search abandoned in favor of escape. Through the crack, Maria watched them prepare to flee through the cottage's rear exit, but spotlights suddenly blazed through the back windows. The FBI had them surrounded. "Vincent Torres, this is Agent Sarah Mitchell," a amplified voice called from outside. "You're surrounded. Release the hostage and surrender." Torres's face twisted with rage as his escape routes vanished. In desperation, he turned back to the fireplace and found the hidden mechanism. The stone panel slid aside with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud. Maria found herself staring down the barrel of Torres's pistol, the cold metal reflecting the lighthouse beam that swept periodically across the cottage. Behind him, his remaining men took defensive positions at the windows. "Well, well," Torres said softly. "The little bird who's been singing songs about things that should stay buried. It's over," Maria whispered, clutching the evidence. "Everyone knows the truth now." "Truth?" Torres laughed bitterly. "Truth is what powerful people say it is, and dead women tell no truths at all." He raised the weapon, but Maria held up the satchel. "Kill me and you'll never find all the copies. Detective Chen has backups. The FBI has backups. The story's already been sent to reporters." Torres hesitated, his finger tight on the trigger. Through the walls came Agent Mitchell's voice again. "Last chance, Torres. We're coming in." The lighthouse beam swept across them once more, and Maria closed her eyes, praying her baby would somehow survive what came next.